Tonight, vaccine mandate.
Don't force someone to do this against their will.
The government rolls out a rule that companies with 100 or more workers require employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19. This as jobless claims hit a new pandemic low. And the president's chief medical advisor on the firing line in Congress.
We know that vaccines absolutely save lives, and we know that mandates work.
Plus, the perfect storm.
So you have a lot of things that are stacking on top of one another that's creating this glut of cargo coming to the states.
The trucking industry, port problems, and the supply chain bottleneck. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. Vaccine or bust. Good evening, I'm Jenna Browder. That's the message from the Biden administration tonight. The White House announcing today a new vaccine mandate for businesses with more than 100 employees. The order calling for businesses to either require vaccinations or weekly testing for unvaccinated employees. CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson has our top story. Abby?
That's right, Jenna. The mandate is expected to affect an estimated 84 million people and is already receiving pushback from workers, a number of states, and Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill.
Don't force someone to do this against their will. Allow them to talk to their doctor, to look at their family medical history.
More than 40 GOP senators argue it's unconstitutional and will exacerbate the current labor shortage.
The idea that one man, the president of the United States, can force Americans to choose between getting a vaccine or keeping their job and putting food on the table for their family undermines literally all principles of liberty found in our Constitution.
If workers opt to submit weekly tests instead of getting the vaccine, companies are not obligated to pay for their tests. For some 17 million people working in nursing homes, hospitals, and other healthcare facilities that receive money from Medicare and Medicaid, getting vaccinated is the only option.
We know that vaccines absolutely save lives, and we know that mandates work.
Workers will, however, be able to ask for religious or medical exemptions.
These vaccines are preventing disease. They are preventing tenfold more likely to be hospitalized if you're unvaccinated versus vaccinated, 11-fold more likely to die.
And more than 24 state attorneys generals are already indicating plans to sue the administration, arguing only Congress has the power to enact such a mandate under emergency authorization. Jenna?
All right, Abby, thank you very much. Well, the White House says this mandate won't affect the supply chain, but it reportedly does not include a carve-out for truck drivers. So major trucking companies already facing a driver shortage could see more of their workforce quit. Tonight, the port in Long Beach, California remains seriously backlogged. CBN's Brody Carter spoke with experts calling the shots in that state.
Yes, they're calling it a perfect storm thanks to a COVID backup. Ships backlogged for months now, pushing full steam ahead into ports and warehouses that have no room for product. And that's because truckers who move cargo are dropping in droves.
The Port of Los Angeles announced today that it's going to begin operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
The misinformation, I think, was by saying, okay, Biden just ordered all the ports 24/7. That's going to solve the problem. No, it won't.
For 15 years, Captain Manny Aschemeyer oversaw our nation's largest port complex as executive director at the Marine Exchange for Southern California.
Answering that age-old question, has my ship come in? And we answer that question literally thousands of times a day.
Based on his experience, Captain Manny says the around-the-clock mandate only works if each part of the distribution chain plays by the same rules.
When you deliver that cargo to a distribution center or a warehouse or some guy's business, and they're not open, they're only open 8 to 5, then 24/7 doesn't help much because they can't leave that box there, or if they leave that box there, it sits.
The logistical nightmare certainly begins at the ports. If this map looks complicated, that's because it is. In this snapshot from a record-breaking day in October, these nearly 100 markers represent ships waiting to unload in the LA Long Beach port complex. Dozens more wait off the coast for room to get to port.
So you have a lot of things that are stacking on top of one another that's creating this glut of cargo coming to the States.
Backlogs began due to COVID shutdowns, which sparked massive warehouse layoffs. Then the hyper-buying of goods to restock shelves followed, leaving only limited staff to do the work.
Well, I would say every deadline's being missed. Many of them have been on their ships now for nearly 2 years, unable to get a relief. And that is a nasty reality.
Captain Manny says the real panic in the pantry comes from what's happening in the trucking industry.
The last mile in trade is the most critical. That's when it goes from the warehouse to the store shelf. And that's usually done by a truck.
California independent truckers are fighting an uphill battle with the state legislature. That's because Assembly Bill 5, which is intended to give Uber and Lyft drivers minimum wage and other benefits, also affects about half of the state's truckers. The bill stops them from operating their own rigs by their own rules.
And a lot of independent contractors simply took a hike and went to other ports around the country to work, or frankly got out of the business altogether.
Another hurdle is a California environmental group barring truckers from registering rigs built before 2010.
And suddenly you're telling a guy that's got a truck that's 10 and a half years old, they say, well, you can't use it anymore.
Given these restraints and driver shortages, Captain Manny says store shelves will sit bare past Christmas, and the cost of everything will continue going up.
The West Coast has evolved the way it has through no one's fault.
While that might be true, more trouble could lay ahead. Given the excessive backup in incoming cargo, contracts for about 15,000 West Coast dock workers are set to expire next summer. This as union workers fight the impact of automation, which is expected to increase at more terminals. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Well, to the battle over abortion, Republicans in Ohio are proposing an abortion ban that mirrors the Texas law, now under consideration by the U.S. Supreme Court. The new legislative model comes amid a hearing today in the House that focused on the law which bans abortion after a heartbeat is detected in the womb as early as 6 weeks into a pregnancy. Catherine Glenn Foster, president and CEO of Americans United for Life, testified at that hearing.
If you asked most Americans on the street and told them that very serious people were convening hearings to call for more abortions to take place, they'd rightly be speechless. Yet that is what is happening here today.
Restart the clock and
The hearing was meant to focus on the Texas law, but turned into a much broader debate on abortion overall in the U.S. One major criticism of the Texas law is that it puts the onus of enforcement on citizens. Citizens are encouraged to sue anyone who aids an abortion. With that, let's bring in our chief political analyst, David Brody. David, let's start with this Texas law. Inspiring other states like Ohio now, do you think this trend, David, could affect how the Supreme Court rules?
Well, I think the technical answer on that is no. The Supreme Court would be the first one. The folks on the Supreme Court, which would be the justices, would say no, because none of this is supposed to kind of affect their ruling, if you will. But there's a more complicated answer than that. I mean, the truth of the matter is Ohio is not the only state. There have been plenty of other states that have tried to enact these type of laws that we've seen in Texas. And so, there is kind of a cultural aspect to all of this. This idea that if the train is moving in a certain direction, the Supreme Court typically, even though they'll never say this, they typically kind of like to kind of figure out the nuance of the culture at the time and figure out whether or not they've got to kind of move with it. And that's the truth. And that's really a progressive position, a living, breathing constitution, something conservatives are against, but that is human nature. So to a degree, I think it matters, but overall, in terms of how they rule, probably not.
Yeah, we'll all await how they rule. That's expected in June. David, let's talk about this this new vaccine mandate. It affects some 84 million workers. The Biden administration says it's necessary to get a handle on COVID, and also today they said they don't see it getting caught up in the courts. GOP lawmakers, though, they say it's unconstitutional. David, what are your thoughts here?
Well, can I laugh for about 7 seconds and then I'll give you my answer? I mean, the Biden administration is saying it's not going to get caught up in the courts. It's exactly what's going to happen. As a matter of fact, it's already getting caught up in the courts. As a matter of fact, when they said that line, when the White House said the line, it's not going to get caught up in the courts, it was already in the courts. I mean, do they think we're stupid? Seriously, Jenna, I mean, do they really think we're stupid? Look, of course it's going to be in the courts. And there's so many ways that each state is going to go about this from an unconstitutional standpoint. But why don't we start with something called, the 10th Amendment, which basically says that states have the prerogative on pretty much so many issues except for X, Y, and Z. And this just in, vaccine mandates are not part of the 10th Amendment. In other words, the federal government does not have jurisdiction on anything as it relates to federal mandates. So this is what the argument's going to be with states to say, hey, stay out of our business, get off our lawn, if you will, to the Biden administration. And I think this has iceberg right ahead written all over it for the Biden administration. This is not good. I mean, this feels very unconstitutional.
Yeah, David, let me ask you about that. You know, there's reportedly no carve out in this mandate for truck drivers, many of whom are not vaccinated. You know, so the supply chain could get even more backed up as we approach the busy holiday season. Politically, how bad could this be for Democrats and for the Biden administration?
Atrocious politically. And by the way, if you want a Lunchable, good luck. I mean, I tried to find a Lunchable the other day for my granddaughter. I couldn't find one. Look, here's the point. The supply chain is out of control in America, and now you don't want to have a carve out for, first of all, it shouldn't even be a carve out, but I mean, they want to carve out for, or they don't want to carve out, for truck drivers. Jenna, there are 80,000 truck drivers that are not on the job as we speak. That's up from 60,000 just a couple of weeks ago. This is getting worse and worse. So think about that. I mean, forget for a moment if you're a liberal or conservative. Forget if you approve vaccine mandates or don't. Just think of it from a supply chain standpoint. If you have less workers, whether they be truck drivers or medical professionals or closing hospitals, I mean, you're going to have problems in the supply chain no matter what. So this is just an economic issue, and it's a no-brainer issue. So politically, this is just horrible for the Biden administration. It makes you wonder, why are they doing this? Do they want to create the chaos to get their $1.75 trillion bill passed? That's what you really have to wonder, honestly.
David, we only have a few seconds left, but I do want to ask you about infrastructure. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, she wants to have a vote on both the Build Back Better spending plan and the bipartisan infrastructure bill before we see the weekend. You know, even if they pass, though, the House, Senator Joe Manchin says he won't support Build Back Better as it stands. And we also learned today this latest version does not include the Hyde Amendment, which he has said is a non-starter for him as well. What is the calculation here for Speaker Pelosi, David?
I'll try to be quick. Yeah, it makes no sense at all. The only thing I can think of is that Pelosi is saying, look, we're going to do our business in the House, and then we can kind of just let Manchin torpedo the whole thing, but at least we did the right thing. That's all I can think of.
All right. David, unfortunately, we're out of time. We have to leave it there. Thank you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Jenna.
And we'll be right back. The latest jobless numbers are in and reveal a pretty positive outlook for the economy. Stops and starts and bumps along the way have marked the economy's road to recovery in this pandemic, but today showed another sign of healing in the job market. Jobless claims falling to a new pandemic low last week to 269,000. That's a drop of about 14,000 from the previous week. 2.1 million Americans are still collecting unemployment benefits, down from about 7.1 million a year ago. And joining us now is Mark Hamrick, Senior Economic Analyst and Washington Bureau Chief at Bankrate. Mark, it's good to have you with us. Thank you for being here. So, you know, the report looks pretty good. Unemployment down in October. Private sector jobs were up nearly 200,000, more than expected. And the Labor Department expected to announce another 450,000 new jobs in tomorrow's October jobs report. Mark, how are you feeling about the state of the job market in America?
Jenna, you know, right now we're really seeing a steady healing of the job market, and that's borne out in the latest jobless claims data. We are, as you say, at the lowest levels of this pandemic era. And so the issue is not fresh job loss. It is rather that there's a shortage of workers, as we've heard earlier in this program, relative to all the job openings that are out there. So what we really want to see is further healing in the job market. We'll get the monthly employment data very soon, and that will likely show show that there were more workers added in the previous month, and the unemployment rate will likely remain close to the recent level of 4.8%.
Yeah, the White House today announced its new vaccine mandate for businesses. Oh, there you are. We got your video. We reported that, this could be a big problem for truck drivers and the already stuck supply chain. Mark, what do you foresee for the labor force?
Well, obviously, it doesn't help, but it also doesn't help to have a pandemic. And so we've known all along that really the broader solution for the economy was getting the pandemic under control. There have been a lot of, I would say, overblown predictions about the negative impacts of at least the requests, if you want to put it that way, to have people vaccinated, and in some cases, the requirement in New York City, that level of police officers who have been sent home is 0.25% of the workforce, hardly something that really affects the workforce dramatically. The trucker shortage is a real thing, but that is something that has been around for years now. We do need to get that problem addressed. The vaccination issue is really one that's quite separate, I think.
Yeah. One thing that a lot of people are feeling in their pocketbooks, Mark, is groceries and gas prices hitting Americans very hard right now, especially as we head into the holiday season. How long will this last?
It's going to last longer than anybody predicted, and how long exactly is anyone's guess. But, we have these supply chain difficulties. We have these cargo ships that are off the West Coast and elsewhere around the world that essentially aren't able to get into port. And we also have consumers who have abnormal demand for goods, in some cases because that's all they can spend on, or that's all they have been spending on, the whole home renovations boom, online orders and the like. And so the pandemic really is the cause of the supply chain difficulties and outsized demand for all kinds of things. And as that demand begins to settle down, all those things will begin to get back to a more normal level. But unfortunately, it is going to take more time. And as I like to say to some people, we need to perhaps try to put these things in perspective. If we can't get our absolute first choice for a holiday gift, we might have to get our second or third. And last time I checked, that really wasn't what the holidays are all about anyway.
All right, Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. We'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
And when we come back, a new book reveals a far more complex set of issues leading up to the 11-day war this spring between Hamas and Israel. Welcome back. Well, tonight we want to focus your attention on a new book that takes a deep look into the 11-day war this spring between Hamas and Israel. It was a conflict with periodic flare-ups, sometimes described as a cycle of violence. Jonathan Schanzer's new book, Gaza Conflict 2021, reveals a deeper set of complex dynamics at play. And Jonathan joins us now in studio. Jonathan, welcome. We should also mention that you are a senior vice president at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies here in Washington. First of all, congratulations on the new book. And I guess my first question is, what led you to write about this topic?
Yeah, well, thanks, Jenna. I watched the war play out over 11 days. I saw really a huge gap between the way that it was covered here in the mainstream media in the United States and then the difference watching it from Israeli TV, watching it in Hebrew, even watching it in Arabic TV. There were just huge gaps. The coverage was poor here. And this was really an attempt to try to set the record straight to demonstrate that Israel was involved in a defensive war against an aggressive terrorist organization.
What did the mainstream media miss, Jonathan?
Well, they missed the cause of the war. They blamed it on a real estate dispute in Jerusalem. They missed a number of core operations that the Israelis carried out, defensive operations that were often described as aggressive or even attempts to quell the media or to silence it. Really, there was so many times where the fingers were being pointed directly at the Israelis as they fought off a war where 4,000 rockets were raining down on Israel and most of their operations were defensive.
I know you're also an Iran watcher. Weapons-grade uranium enrichment is 90%. Iran right now is at 60%, and it looks like they can get to up to the 90% level pretty quickly. Is Iran just stalling here?
Well, I think they are. I think they're playing for time for sure. We now have reports that they'll be heading into renewed negotiations right after Thanksgiving. And the real concern that we have right now is that the Biden administration will be willing to go less for less. In other words, a much more modest agreement with fewer restrictions in place that would likely put Iran in the driver's seat with that nuclear program. We're at a really dangerous moment, and the hope here anyway is that the Biden administration will not cave, but every indication right now suggests that they will.
Shifting gears here a little bit, you have testified before Congress about the funding of the BDS movement. That stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. Talk to us a little bit about what you found out about the money behind BDS.
Sure. FDD did several years worth of research. We ultimately found that one of the groups involved in pushing for this boycott, divestment, and sanctions against Israel, that a lot of their core came from charities that were previously shut down by the FBI and the Treasury Department for funding Hamas. These people themselves are not likely funding Hamas. I have no indication that they are, but they come from a deeply anti-Israel ideological background where they were associated with some pretty nefarious characters. So it was a real cause for concern when we found that research to bear out that way.
All right, his new book, once again, is Gaza Conflict 2021. Jonathan Schanzer, it's great to have you with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And still ahead, a David and Goliath story. How a conservative New Jersey truck driver overhauled his powerful Democratic opponent. Political upset in New Jersey. The state's Senate President, Steve Sweeney, a longtime Democrat, defeated by Republican Edward Durr, a truck driver who spent just $153 on his primary campaign.
New Jersey, it's time for a change. So together, let's end single-party rule. Vote for me, Edward Durr, for Senate.
And Durr lost a race for the state assembly back in 2019 and has never held public office. He describes himself as a blue-collar conservative. Sweeney had been discussed as a likely candidate for governor in 2025. And I was reading somewhere today that most of that $153 that he spent on his primary campaign was spent at Dunkin' Donuts. So there you have it. We thank you so much for joining us this evening. Have a great evening, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.